One of my favorite movies is Multiplicity. Multiplicity. Do you remember the Michael Keaton movie Multiplicity? The Michael Keaton movie Multiplicity basically is there's a guy, and kind of like most guys, he just doesn't have any time. He doesn't have any time to play golf, to go out with the dudes, to even sometimes be a dad. He's just like working, and he feels like he's missing life. And so there's a company that can splice his genes and create a copy, a genetic copy of him. Things go awry, though, when there's a copy of a copy, right? And this, of course, if you remember back when you were a kid and we had these things called VHS tapes. Do you guys remember VHS tapes? And I'm not even going to start on Betamax, okay? You have VHS tapes. Those are the cassette tapes that we used to record things on. My dad got the first ever camcorder. There's all kinds of shots playing all sports. But VHS tapes, you could splice them. You could copy them. A buddy could buy a movie, and you could have the two VHS tapes. One tapes the other one. And occasionally you would have an issue with something called tracking. Do you guys remember tracking? Tracking! Somebody fix the tracking! Tracking problems were all of a sudden there'd be like a white line that would somehow appear in the screen, and there was some knob that no one really knew how it worked, but it would just turn. And then there was auto tracking, and boom, it was fixed. The problem with the tracking issues was when you did a copy of that copy, now the tape sucked. And if you've ever lived overseas, I have, the bootleg cassette tapes you would get of Friday or Friday After Next in the early 2000s were a copy of a copy. Not only were they not in English, but you couldn't usually see them, and it would cut out some of the best scenes and some of the best lines. It feels like Alabama last night was a copy of a copy. Sure, they looked finally like Alabama had Tua at quarterback, meaning you got a legit pro prospect at quarterback, something they haven't really had. Have they had quarterbacks that have played in the National Football League? Yes, but have they had a dude at quarterback? Right? That was the difference this year. Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, three programs that usually have the most dudes, or three of the programs that have the most dudes in college football, finally have a quarterback. But the problem was between the defense, some of the offense, the running backs, the coordinators themselves, you had copies of a copy. Like Mike Locksley didn't suddenly become a genius because he went to Alabama. This is the same guy who was 2-26 as a head coach at New Mexico. Now, he got the job at Maryland because of his relationships in the area, and because he was offensive coordinator for the most dominant or second most dominant offense in college football. But he's a copy of a copy. And they ran up against the real thing. They ran up against a first-run DVD, direct, skip cinema movie right to your home, and they got tracking issues. Clemson was the better team. Saban knew they were the better team. That's why they went for it and ran fake field goals and tried a bunch of other stuff that they normally wouldn't. You know why? Because normally, 95% of the time, they got better players than the other team. That was a coaching mismatch. A game coaching mismatch. And Saban would tell you as much. Do you know why? Because that's not what Nick Saban does. Somebody does. Nick Saban's a really good defensive coordinator, a really good coach who hires really good people and challenges them constantly to be better. That's what he does. He's a great recruiter. He's a great leader. He is incredibly organized. Incredibly. But let's not act like in-game there's been anything special about Alabama's game plans on the offensive side of the football. Remember, he fought the tide of the trendy tempo offenses for years, even said they were dangerous to college football players. Last night, when you're playing against like talent, you actually have to be a good game coach. You have to prepare in a short period of time And Clemson looked like they had prepared. Now, part of Clemson preparing was probably Clemson doing what you're supposed to do in college, and I didn't do. My wife used to do this, right? Where you keep up with the syllabus, you do all the reading, you don't really have to cram before finals. Whereas Alabama, they tried to cram. But even if you ask Nick Saban, when Nick Saban, this is a true story from somebody I know who I trust. So it's secondhand information. I'm not telling you I was there. But secondhand information was this. When he got the job at Alabama, when he took the job at Alabama, remember, he's the head coach of the Miami Dolphins. How many times do I have to say this? I'm not going to be the head coach at Alabama. Remember that? And he took the job at Alabama, and he was flying to go on his first recruiting visits, and he's on the Alabama team plane, and the Alabama president was with him, and he said, "We just got the best coach in America." You know what Nick Saban said? No, you didn't. You got the best recruiter in America. Nick Saban may appear to you as being super arrogant. I actually think he is the brightest sort of leader that there is. He has had the biggest staff in college football. He has found some of the brightest young assistants in college football because he knows enough to know what he doesn't know. And he hires those people to do it. And his staff wasn't that good this year. And Nick Saban, like he's going to sit there and solve the offensive riddles in game. Sure, they got outplayed. They also got outcoached. Whereas the reason Kliff Kingsbury didn't survive and succeed at Texas Tech, look, part of it is that entire league is wired for offense. So while if he would have run the same offense and the same style in the Big Ten, maybe they set everybody's hair on fire. Or in the SEC, same thing. But in the Big 12, you can score 60, so what? We can score 70. Coaching in college football is about only a quarter is actually about the coaching. 75% of it is about recruiting, managing boosters, managing a program, managing your assistants, your trainers, academics, all of that other stuff. In the NFL, can you coach ball? And then can you hire people to coach the things that you don't coach? You can sit here and tell me, well, Kliff Kingsbury didn't succeed in the Big 12, and he might not succeed at Arizona. He might not. They might be a mess. They hired a guy, and, 11 months later, they fired a guy. But the Green Bay Packers just hired a head coach who's never been a head coach and was offensive coordinator for the 29th ranked offense in the league, right? What were your options? It's a completely different profession, coaching in the pros and coaching in college. The pros is about ball and about leading men. College is about everything except ball. But then last night, it did become about coaching football. And Saban, the truth about Saban was exposed. The truth about Saban is exposed. And that's okay. Saban knows that. He's not an idiot. You don't be that successful and not know your weaknesses. You haven't self-scouted. Look, I've said the same thing. Roy Williams' camp doesn't like me. They don't. They don't like me. They've never wanted me to call games, be around the program. And I've said, look, he is a Hall of Fame coach that won, I believe, a higher percentage of games than anybody and won a couple national titles. You know what he's not? He's not a great in-game X and O coach. Dean Smith wasn't. They'd sub their way out of leads. But they run an incredible program. And they teach kids how to play basketball so the kids can kind of figure it out on their own. And he has a good staff, and they kind of figure some stuff out. But if it comes down to X and O and one play here, one play there, he didn't know Bill Self was in a triangle and two a couple years ago. Villanova ran a play at the end of the game to win a national championship that they had run 9 times during the season. And look, he smartly put his best shot blocker under the hoop to protect the rim, but who do you think was guarding Chris Jenkins? This is not a shot at Roy Williams. It's just to be a great college coach, sometimes you don't have to actually be a great X and O coach. And occasionally when you do, this happens. You get beat. When you're used to having better players 95% of the time, that other 5% of the time, things change. And if you don't have the help on your staff to fix things on the fly, you get embarrassed.